Well, welcome to Questrom Insights Live in the Cicillo Institute for Ethics in the Global Economy webinar series. I'm Dave Epstein, Executive Director of the Cicillo Institute, a part of Boston University Questrom School of Business, which examines issues and explores solutions to global ethical challenges in business. So one of the most effective guardrails in our capitalistic business environment turns out not to be regulation, but rather often overlooked individuals, each with an enviable moral compass. It's not easy standing up against harmful business practices, whether it be financial fraud or disregard for the health of the unsuspecting public, and it has its perils. The government and the law encourage doing this, doing the right thing with some protections and rewards. Today, we meet three guests steeped in whistleblower actions as lawyers, teachers, and whistleblowers themselves. Steve Kohn is a top U.S. whistleblower attorney with over $10 billion in judgments. Currently, Steve represents the Danske Bank whistleblower in a $230 billion largest ever money laundering scandal. He has won a $320 million Novartis whistleblower sanction and the largest individual reward paid under the IRS, SEC, and DOJ provisions. He's helped draft whistleblower legislation, including those in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the Dodd-Frank Act, money laundering laws, and the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. Steve authored the first legal treatise on whistleblowing and is the most published author on whistleblower protection. He has been recognized as a top 50 plaintiff lawyer by the National Law Journal, and Steve is a proud Boston University grad with a master's from Brown and a JD from Northeastern, sorry. Yeah, that other school in Boston. Steve just completed the book Rules for Whistleblowers, a handbook for doing what's right. You'll see, we'll post in the chat a link to pre-order it at the discount code for all attendees. Generously, all the book sale proceeds go to the National Whistleblower Center, a nonprofit dedicated to helping whistleblowers. Erica Blachman Hitchings is an adjunct professor at Boston University School of Law, where she teaches healthcare fraud and abuse, and a practicing attorney and partner at the Whistleblower Law Collaborative, which represents whistleblowers in nationwide actions under the federal and state False Claims Acts and other whistleblower programs. Prior to the Law Collaborative, Erica spent 9 years at the U.S. Department of Justice investigating, litigating, and settling healthcare and government contracting fraud, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars recovered by the United States. Erica is a frequent speaker on whistleblower laws and healthcare fraud. She's a graduate at Dartmouth and Stanford Law. Tyler Shultz is an entrepreneur fostering innovation in healthcare. He's the co-founder and head of product at The Healthier Company. Tyler is well known for courageously blowing the whistle at Theranos, which is even in the news today too, notifying public health regulators in New York. He was the source for Wall Street Journal articles exposing Theranos's dubious blood testing practices. Tyler was featured in Bad Blood, the book about the scandal by John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal, in Alex Gibney's HBO documentary, The Inventor, and he's the author of the book Thicker Than Water. Since leaving Theranos, Tyler has been a researcher at Stanford, a biotech advisor, and CEO, co-founder of Flux Biosciences, a Bay Area medical diagnostic startup. In 2017, Forbes recognized Tyler on their healthcare 30 under 30 list. Tyler is a biology graduate at Stanford. So please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. We will save time at the end for as many as we can get to. Feel free to use the chat function otherwise. Let's get started. Welcome, Erica, Steve, and Tyler.
Hello.
Okay. So, and Erica, you wanted to mention something at the beginning here about making sure that there's any disclaimers.
Oh, well, right. So thanks for reminding me. While I was at the Department of Justice, I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office for part of that time in the Northern District of California, but I did not work on the Theranos matter.
Thank you. Did that. Good. So, Steve, you've been super successful in representing and winning these whistleblower cases. So maybe from an attorney standpoint, would you briefly walk us through the process of a typical timeline? When do you get involved? How are you found? Then what happens? And just give us some roadmap.
Sure. So the whistleblower is the key, and they'll come to us in kind of two extremes. The first, and which is more common, is they're suffering retaliation after they did the right thing within their company. A lot of whistleblowers are ethically driven, and they just think reporting fraud or misconduct or scientific scandals, is what you should do. Well, they learn the hard way, and they suffer retaliation, they get fired, and then they're looking for legal counsel. So that's the first way they come in. That can be really bad because the way they blew the whistle, who they contacted, how they gathered evidence, all could really undermine their case. And many people walk into my office, they've already lost because the way they went about it was intuitively correct, but the law is often not intuitive. It's just the way it is. The second type, to the other extreme, which is really, in my view now, where whistleblowers must be, is before you open your mouth. You've got to understand that if the bosses are involved in criminal activity, be it securities fraud, tax evasion, whatever, they are not going to welcome a whistleblower. So it is really best to talk to a lawyer confidentially, lay out the facts, and then proceed under advice of counsel for two reasons. First, so you do it right and you don't disqualify yourself, you don't miss the deadlines. And second, so you get a really good understanding of what's going to happen at work and how you need to deal with it. And that's the venture. After that, it's really, the lawyer can look pretty smart, but it's really the whistleblower. It's what information do they have? And then it's just my job really to take their information and their testimony and get it to the appropriate authorities in a lawful manner. And then all of a sudden, a case that looks like the Donsky case, who knew what that was when he came in? He found 12 fraudulent accounts. It turns into 230 billion in money laundering from Russia and Russian former Soviet states into the West over a 10 or 12 year period of time. So you don't actually know what you have when it walks in, but the lawyer's job is to let it develop in the way it needs to develop and fully protect the client. So I think that answers the question. I'm sure Erica and Tyler have more to say. Yeah,
well, it does sound a little bit scary that the first ways that probably people go about it may be the wrong way. That's seems like we need to educate.
That's 90% the wrong way.
So Erica, you teach this stuff, so maybe you want to chime in?
Sure. And I saw Tyler had something to add. So because I haven't been representing the whistleblower, him or herself, as many years as Stephen. I mean, I agree with everything Stephen said, but I also want to acknowledge that a large number of our clients have come in, and while it may not have done everything the way that if you had called us first would be, in the book, I am sure it lays out, which is great that it's out there now, right? But we have built very successful cases, whether they're current or former employees too. And frankly, there are certain programs and certain times where having, and I think this is encompassed, I don't disagree with what Stephen said about, reaching out to a lawyer before you before you fully go all in on this. I mean, it depends on your position. I mean, compliance personnel, it's their job, right? If you're in the compliance world, you're already doing this, but then there's a certain point at which you realize it's not going to be fixed. that's the moment maybe to consult. And I just flag that, you know, that's intimidating. Number one, calling a lawyer, I know, is always intimidating. It is confidential, ethical rules. We're at an ethics connection here. You know, we are maintaining confidentiality from that first call. And typically, I can't speak for all the lawyers out there, but because there are whistleblower reward programs, which we can get into the details of, whether it's the SEC or the False Claims Act, depending what kind of fraud you've got at your company. There are almost always opportunities for a more contingency-based or advice-based counsel, so that you're not going to be having to shell out, you know, thousands of dollars just to get basic advice on doing the right thing. That can be really frustrating and overwhelming and maybe a barrier. So I want to just get the word out. And frankly, I'm curious what Tyler has to say about that, because I know that felt like a barrier at one point to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I raised my hand, I was basically just saying like, yep, I fall into that 90% that probably did not do it the right way. And part of my problem is by the time I did engage with the lawyer, I was way, way, way too deep into it. I didn't engage with the lawyer until I had a notice to appear in court because they were threatening to sue me. You know, at that point, you know, it's really hard to kind of unwind things and do it the right way once you're, you know, on the verge of a courtroom battle. But if I could go back in time and do it differently, I absolutely would have spoken to a lawyer while I still worked at the company, and they would have been able to advise me what types of information, whether it be data, whether it be emails, that I could take out of the company and who I could bring it to safely, because there are protected whistleblower channels. And then I actually tried to do that on my own without a lawyer, and ultimately the complaint ended up at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they essentially just didn't respond. And years later, a Wall Street Journal reporter followed up, and I forget the details, but basically the complaint got lost in the shuffle. So the other thing that a lawyer could have been really helpful with is lawyers know people at all of these government agencies, and if they knew that their whistleblower submitted a complaint to a government entity, they would have followed up and they would have said, what happened to this complaint? Did someone read it? Was any action taken? Maybe the whistleblower was wrong. And as a whistleblower, that was one thing that I would always say to myself, like, I could be wrong and Theranos could have all the right answers, and that's totally fine. I should not feel like I should hesitate to ask questions. And so I from my perspective, I was just asking questions. If Theranos had all the right answers, that's great, but I felt like someone had to ask these tough questions. But yeah, I think getting a lawyer involved earlier would have saved me a lot of emotional duress and a lot of money, because by the time I did engage with my own legal counsel, you know, I had to get a criminal defense lawyer, a defamation lawyer, an IP lawyer, had a litigator. Like I just, you know, things. By the time I engaged with the lawyer, it was way too late, and I ended up spending around $500,000 in legal fees. And my goal when I met each of my lawyers, I basically just said, my goal is to stay out of a courtroom. I don't want to go to court. Let's just find a way to settle this dispute outside of a courtroom.
Steve, you're shaking your head. It's
just so tragic, you know, that you'd have to spend that much money when probably at the start you could have gotten Erica or I to pick up your case on contingency and had a good time with it. But the only thing I want to say is, you know, and this is to everyone who's going to enter the business world, you're going to walk in and they're going to have a handbook and says report, and here's compliance and here's audit, we're open door, we're open this, we're open that. And there's going to be a lot of propaganda about, you know, internal and how great we are. You just have to remember one thing. When you point out that the emperor has no clothes, the emperor's not happy. Ibsen said it in Enemy of the People, you know, 150 years ago. If the company engaged in wrongdoing or criminal activity, they are going to retaliate. They have two choices. Once the whistleblower steps forward with accurate information, whether the whistleblower knows it or not. So Tyler, whether you or just didn't know it, but once you confront them and they'll know it, they have two choices: turn themselves in and admit their guilt, and I haven't seen that much going on, or destroy the whistleblower, cover up, retaliate, intimidate. Everything that Tyler said, it's an extreme case. It usually doesn't get that bad. But what do we know about Tyler's case? It was that bad. It was a massive criminal conspiracy where people are going to jail. And again, that's what you see. The stronger your evidence, the bigger the violation, the more the risk of extreme retaliation. Therefore, Congress has now created safe, anonymous, and confidential reporting channels. Eric, I'm sure, can explain those in much better detail, but there are ways to do it to protect yourself. But what happened to Tyler is, in my experience, 90% plus. Often you can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Sometimes you can't.
So before we get Eric, I do want to have you explain maybe a little bit about some of these laws and things that we can work on. But before I do, it seems like that Tyler wouldn't be unique in wanting to go first to your boss and then to their boss or whatever and try to fix it, because in their hearts that's what they really want to do is get it fixed. What percentage of, do you have even an idea? I mean, I'm guessing a lot of them just go away either by intimidation or by we're going to fix it, don't worry about it kind of thing. Do you have any sense as to how many were not?
I can tell you horror stories about people when they get a little pushback, covering it up, doing terrible things, lying under oath, turning on their friends. The intimidation factor is massive. Non-disclosure agreements in these contexts are generally unenforceable or illegal, but 98% of the people who sign them will be intimidated by them. The whistleblower is still a unique feature in the workplace. That's why it's so important to take steps to protect them and give them that anonymity, the protective shield, because most people won't. Those that step forward a little, if they get the pushback, they learn their lesson, and it can be extreme. I mean, I have had so many cases where people's best friends have lied under oath or denied everything, and when you can't find witnesses, and these are especially in retaliation cases, it gets really hard. I know Tyler, his own grandfather was turning on him. It was like, although that might seem extreme, I've seen extreme.
So Erica, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about what's the False Claims Act? What are some of the other things that are there that Congress has passed or other states have passed that kind of are there to help us?
Sure. I mean, I'll focus in on kind of two key ones, and then I'll list off, and Stephen can catch up on any that I don't catch. There's for various. Some of them are older. The False Claims Act dates back to the Civil War, and it is basically, if there is any, it's to recover funds for the taxpayers, for the government, for any fraud against the government. So just to start wondering, how is that so big? Maybe military contracts. Absolutely. That's really where the origins of the Civil War statutes called Lincoln's Law, because the Union Army was getting a lot of defective goods, and they wanted a way to go after and people to report out their employers who were providing really shoddy materials to the Union Army. So that's it got revitalized in 1986, and since then it's really been a major area of civil enforcement, which is recovering money. It has a whistleblower law provision. We won't go into all the details, but the thing that I think is really interesting there is it has a lot of tentacles you may not even think until you're forced to. And I teach healthcare fraud, and this law features very prominently because Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, which covers all of DOD and their families, federal employee health benefit programs, et cetera, are all government money. So very quickly, healthcare fraud, can take up a large, can be, and then as in the business world, trying to keep in mind our audience, right? It is a huge industry, right? So inherently, whether you're in the tech world now, whether it's private equity, wherever you might be going, the healthcare impacts can be huge. And so that is a good portion of it. Another big, so the False Claims Act allows a whistleblower to file a lawsuit and say, I know about a fraud upon the government. I'm going to go to, you need to go to a whistleblower lawyer for this one because you have to file it in a very specific way, and you file it under seal, which is odd. So the average lawyer is confused by that because the average case, the whole point is it's transparent in court, but not a False Claims Act suit, because the next thing that happens is you give it only to the government. So that was my job for 10 years, right? Those cases would land on my desk, and then the government would investigate while the case was under seal. So only the court knew about it, essentially, and the government and the whistleblower. And if the government ultimately identified the problem, corroborated the evidence, built it, as Stephen talked about, right? Built up the case and found dollars, there can maybe a settlement, or they may intervene and join the litigation and go forth. Ultimately, if the government recovers money, the whistleblower can recover a percentage of that, 15 to 25%, typically, sometimes up to 30% in certain situations. And that is where the kind of contingency aspect comes, right? If the whistleblower ultimately gets a reward, these are multi-year cases, so the lawyers are essentially working for free during that time. It's a great job, so I have no complaints about it, but that's ultimately where it kind of comes out in the end. The other main one I wanted to flag is the SEC. I mean, this is an area that's really exciting to me because I did so much False Claims Act work in the government, and now that I am representing whistleblowers, I'm getting to see a broader array of whistleblower programs. The SEC has its own whistleblower program, which also provides for rewards if you don't actually file a lawsuit. There you file a tip. They got over 12,000 tips though. So to Tyler and Stephen's point earlier, I think it was Tyler's point earlier, just the SEC whistleblower program, which is relatively new. I can't remember the number of years, but it's relatively new. Is already at 12,000 a year. So you need, right, somebody to guide that to the right office. But if they ultimately recover, the whistleblower there has an opportunity to make a pitch to get a percent as well. The SEC is very attractive to whistleblowers because there can be complete anonymity, whereas under the False Claims Act, you can be anonymous for a certain amount of time because it's under seal. But it may have sometimes where you'll more often than not ultimately might be identified, although you'll work with your lawyer on that. But anyway, I think those are the two key ones. I think Stephen also mentioned their IRS has a program. There's now new provisions to help increase whistleblowing and create rewards for anti-money laundering issues, sanctions, violations, and CFTC has a program. Department of Transportation actually has one that has new implementing regulations. So it's expanded. There's a lot of industries that Congress has said, this is important. And we recognize there's research, there's, just the past, I don't have the stats with me, but DOJ puts out stats every year. So the amount of money they recover, right, because of whistleblowers. And so the amount of money that's paid out in rewards is minuscule to the amount that is recovered by providing these incentives. And all of these have some level of anti-retaliation protections. There's some are stronger than others. And we prefer our clients to never have to be retaliated against. But a lot of states, I'll just add, and then I'll pause because I can go in teacher mode forever. But most states, not all, about 30-ish, have their own False Claims Act. So you could also have, purely a Medicaid case, right? A defrauding of a certain Medicaid program or a state level contract, right? So it's not always the federal government, but it often is. And they also sometimes, one thing to keep in mind is some states have better employment protections than others. So in addition to whatever these official whistleblower law retaliation provisions provide, there may be some other state laws that you can invoke if you have to ultimately down the road.
So it sounds like, though, on the False Claims Act, that it has to be a fraud against the U.S. government. Is that right? Because and even Tyler mentioned Medicare was a thing, but now most companies in some way or another probably sell to the government or sell to a government contractor or something. So maybe it does that. But does it have to be? I mean, on the SEC side, it's a little different because it's fraudulent sale of stock or whatever. It's under SEC rules. But on the False Claim Act, does it have to be against, you have to find a connection to the government?
And that's the key, a nexus, a connection, right? And dollars, right? It is a law that is designed to return money to the government fist that has been sent out inappropriately, right? Not by accident, but by defrauding. And it's also called the False Claims Act for a reason. So there is a intent standard that you have to meet, but it's not only like what some of you may think of as quote fraud, right? Like, because some misrepresentations, anything that's false. Just, I mentioned healthcare and government contracting, military, that's the obvious, but there's such a wide array now. The government is in a lot of things, right? So customs fraud, there's an emerging area, right? COVID testing that was being paid for, right? COVID, all kinds of stuff, PPP fraud, other kinds of, there's been not as much action, but federally backed loans, right? Mortgage, certainly during the crisis, it wasn't necessarily straight through the False Claims Act, but there were ways to do whistleblower work under that. You name it. I'm sure Stephen's come up with, other, and it's fascinating, the number of areas. It's one of the reasons it's fun to practice, because while I do a lot of healthcare, I may have crypto is touching, right? Like, it's more of an SEC issue, I guess, not an FCA, but there's a lot out there that.
So Steve, maybe, if you want to answer first, you want to say?
Yeah, I might just be answering your question. There's another way of looking at it, which is Congress essentially woke up one day through the False Claims Act and realized that fraud and bribery and corruption are all these hidden crimes. There's no body, no one breaks into your house and steals your television. They steal from you in more business-like fashion. So without an insider, you can't detect these crimes. So it started with False Claims Act, which is, to understand, it's all government procurement and contracting. What the United States is like $2 trillion a year. It's a massive part of the economy. But then they added to it. Then they hit SEC, which is the publicly traded economy. Then they did tax, all taxation, that's massive. Then they did commodities. Commodities is the sale of commodities worldwide. It's massive. Now they just did money laundering and bank secrecy, which also covers crypto, sanctions, etc. So you're looking at this web of very powerful whistleblower laws that permit the whistleblower to get between 10 to 30% of whatever the government collects. And whistleblowers, since the False Claims Act was passed in '86, amended, have been paid at least $10 billion in rewards. Nothing to do with attorney's fees, nothing to do with employment cases, pure monetary rewards. So what we like to say, and it's in my new book, essentially, I call it follow the money. People aren't, I don't think people are born inherently like evil, like in the movies, but they are driven by greed. And most whistleblower cases have an element of greed behind it. People were doing it for profit, to make money. And you follow the money, and you will then often land right on one of these whistleblower laws.
So it sounds like it's hard to avoid falling into one of those categories of selling to or the government, or you just added, or tax fraud, which seems like you can almost get anybody on tax, right? I mean, if you cheated somewhere, then you've cheated the US government out of tax money. So it sounds like that one is quite encompassing. I want to ask you, you've mentioned, and I want to get back to Tyler here for a minute, but you mentioned about these rewards and that they can recover a certain percentage. How many I guess whistleblowers actually recover something as a reward, and is that something that entices whistleblowers? I'm going to ask Tyler about that in a minute, but maybe you can give us an idea of how many people recover money, get a reward of some sort, and what do you see from whistleblowers on that?
So, and I'll just jump in because I've looked at all the programs. It's thousands. And in the IRS program, you have lots of people collecting. They have two different programs. So some of them are fairly small. Some of them are very big. Then you have all the other programs combined. And as I said, it's 10 billion in payments. And I think the average award is about 1.5 million. So you can do some math there. But in reality, what we see is that a large percentage of people who would be otherwise entitled to an award don't qualify because they didn't understand that they could get an award. And I like to say this, that yes, the government will pay, but anyone who thinks it's like an easy day at work to get the government to hand a whistleblower $10 million, no. A lot of these bureaucrats will look for ways to cut it down, to disqualify, and I see that all the time. So right now, in my view, we're in this really interesting time period where these rewards are still not understood, and there's a lot of resistance even within government agencies. Most employees don't understand what they are, how they work, and many never even apply or know what to do. But I think we're moving in a direction where these new super powerful whistleblower laws will mature and become an incredible deterrent to white collar crime. And this is the direction we're going in.
So that's an interesting angle, that maybe it's more important as a deterrent than it is a deterrent for the people who are creating the fraud versus the whistleblower.
And just to jump in, it's all about deterrence. Because when Bradley Birkenfeld was handed a $100 million check for turning in illegal bank accounts at UBS, 50,000 Americans turned themselves in voluntarily because the IRS said the whistleblower will either get you or you can voluntarily turn yourself in for far less penalties. The fear of detection drives voluntary enforcement, not ethical rhetoric in an employee handbook.
And then I would also add that it's great that whistleblowers can get compensation for blowing the whistle. But I think what's even better is that that has now created an industry where lawyers will work on contingency for free. So even if not every whistleblower necessarily collects a reward, they could still benefit from this because maybe they got some free legal counsel for some period of time.
So yeah, so in that, Tyler, how did you think of this? When it sounds like it took a while before you found a lawyer, but in your mind, was there something about that you were being enticed a little bit by, well, I'm kind of playing lottery here and I might be able to make some money at the same time as doing the right thing? Is where does the money enter your thought process? Or did
it didn't at all. I was completely unaware that this even existed. So it wasn't even anywhere close to being on my radar. I was just motivated by I just knew people were getting hurt. I knew Elizabeth was knowingly giving incorrect medical information to thousands of people, and they were growing like crazy. And I just knew people were getting hurt, and I felt like it was something that I directly contributed to for a while. And while I worked there, I kind of felt like I was in that Milgram experiment where you're told to press a button and you hear somebody scream, and then they say, keep pressing the button, and people will just keep doing it. I kind of felt like I was doing that. And that's one of the things that I told my grandfather. I just said, I can't keep pushing this button. I have to make this stop. I have to, start questioning the people who are given the orders to push the button and hold them accountable.
And I'll say, Tyler, so, I mean, I think Tyler stands and as such a great example of this because without that knowledge, right? And it was a big risk because this was like Elizabeth had already been on the cover of all these magazines and right. And the number of people that you're talking about in your own family. But I will say, I've loved now representing whistleblowers, right? So I like the law, obviously, and I like enforcing it, right? That's what I did for the first 10 years of my practice. And I think it's super important. But now that I've had the opportunity for 5 years, essentially, to be representing individual whistleblowers and hear each person's unique way of coming to this moment, whether, officially they follow the checklist that Stephen would want them to follow or not, but however they find their way to us, it's always compelling. right? There's always, and I know that that may not, I hope this perception is changing. And that's part of why I'm so excited to be doing this webinar in the business school, because I will tell you, and I say this to my government friends, right? Like, you know, our clients come, they've tried to blow the whistle internally. They don't, half the time, they don't even know that there was a whistleblower program, but they now at least know that there might be whistleblower lawyers, right? Or somebody has told them that there's people who specialize. They often come because they figure there's some retaliation laws that could, anti-retaliation laws that could protect them, right? So we do a lot of employment counseling while we're trying to figure out, is there even a fraud case here? And so I was just talking about this with my students, and I think I got across to them, the vast majority of our clients, both the kind of potential clients and then ultimately people who go through, have come forward for, driven by a moral compass, a fear of patient harm, since I do a fear of military harm, right? If someone's taking shortcuts in selling defective products to the military, I mean, the reasons are real. And they're things that keep people up at night, and they come to us to help them solve that problem. They don't come to us saying, how much money can I make? Right? The mechanism is important. I've thought about this since we started putting this together. The mechanism is important for a whole host of reasons, right? That we've already been touching on: deterrence, creating an industry, of lawyers who can afford to take on a variety of cases. We don't get paid on every single case, but that's okay. Because we can get paid on some of them, but it is also, I mean, frankly, these cases, it's not just to create an ability for an incentive for the whistleblower and an incentive for the lawyers, is to create a path of investigation. The False Claims Act has a statutory requirement that if you file that case, and there's a lot of people who come to us and we won't file the case, even if we believe them, right? We just don't have the evidence, right? It's not maybe for whatever reason, but if it makes that cut and it gets filed and, lawyers putting their name on it and it goes to the Department of Justice, they are required to investigate it. Now, obviously, if they see a fault with the claim right away, they can do a very quick investigation and focus on the ones that are most likely to be fraud. But that's powerful, right? And you can, and it is more effective than just sending in a hotline tip. And frankly, to Tyler's point, there are times there may not be a avenue for a reward because maybe the billing, there hasn't been that much Medicare defrauding. They're not public yet. You're not sure if there'd be an SEC. We also know people, and we have put folks in touch with the right people in the government to get the problem to stop, right? Or if somebody doesn't want to actually go through the process of a whistleblower award, program. So, I mean, I think it's just, we just try to get the word out that you don't have to suffer it all night alone, right? I mean, it is a lonely experience. I'm not going to pretend to be a whistleblower, and I can let Tyler and others speak to that more, but, at least you can have a counsel by your side.
So Steve, it sounds like that most whistleblowers are trying to do the right thing. They can't sleep at night for whatever reason this is. How do you select who you represent? Does that have to do with money?
Bottom line, yes, because for my first 15 years of practice, we only did retaliation cases, pretty much. It's bloody, and the power differential is radical, where the companies have like unlimited resources to fight, and it's one individual, and it's often hard to get witnesses. So that, in my view, is it becomes you got to deal with whistleblowing on a rational economic basis. Forget the emotion. And it becomes a cost benefit. The cost of going forward with all of the risks it implies, with the benefits of going forward. Now, if you're going to blow the whistle, say in a gigantic scandal where people's lives are at risk, the benefits of going forward are tremendous, even if the ability to collect an award is minimum, because there's a lot of benefit to helping save people's lives. On the other hand, if you don't have good evidence, and the odds are the government won't back you up, there'll be no enforcement action. Do you really want to give up your entire career for very little and maybe a lot of headache? You have to view it rationally. And once you put the reward concept into that formula, you actually have a way to give good advice to potential whistleblowers. Is it worth it? Can you be anonymous? What's the odds of getting an award? Will the company know who you are? And you can really sit down, and guess what? The whistleblower can end up as the winner. And that's what, to me, that's what it's all about. It's all about what the whistleblower ending up in a better position, and hopefully the country and society ending up in a better position through a rational process dictated on the rules of evidence and what the laws are and the economic pros and cons.
Yeah. I just want to remind people to put some questions in the question and answer. We do have a couple of them, so let me move to some of that. But I think just on the same thread here, before I get to the questions, Tyler, how did you find your lawyers? You know, did you look for a whistleblower lawyer, or were you looking? You mentioned before that you want an IP lawyer and a litigator and that kind of stuff. Did you look for someone that would defend you as a whistleblower?
So the first lawyer that I met with was actually an estate lawyer. It was actually my grandfather's estate lawyer, because they were pressuring me to sign this affidavit. And if I had signed it, I would have been committing perjury. So I said, I want to have a lawyer look at this before I signed it. And my grandfather suggested that I talk to his estate lawyer. And I actually am a huge fan of, I've grown to, like, I didn't really know him that well at the time, but now I know him a little bit better. He's a really, really great person. And so even though an estate lawyer was not the right fit for me from a personality standpoint, he was the right fit for like that first day. And then he set me up with these other attorneys that were more specialized. And my legal team was really quarterbacked by the IP attorney, actually. And actually, I did end up also getting connected with a whistleblower attorney as well. So we looked at it from every single possible angle.
So I have a number of questions from one of our attendees, Stephen, and he asked, this has to do with all these things about getting a lawyer. First of all, he wants to know, did you get to recoup any of your legal fees? And you ended up saying you $500,000 or more. Did you get some of that back?
Nope.
Ouch. So you know, in Theranos' case, I guess not much money was recovered at the end of that. That's the reality of that?
We'll see. It's kind of, I think we're supposed to hear what the judge comes to on restitution by the end of this month, is what I think he said. So we don't know what the fines are yet. But I'm assuming that even if he hits them with, you know, $100 million fine, they're not going to be able to pay it. And that's one of the really frustrating things about this case, is that Elizabeth is living in a $100 million estate. She's reportedly spent over $30 million on her personal legal defense. Their other legal fees probably push them up into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and she can afford to pay $0 in a fine. She is the wealthiest broke person on the planet.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not sure what the solution is, but it's just not right. It's not right that you can spend literally tens of millions of dollars in your personal legal defense and not have a dime to pay in a fine. And it seems like there should be some kind of formula where, like, you know, most people are not going to be able to spend more than $1 million in their own legal defense. But once you do, it's like every dollar you pay a lawyer, you also need to set $1 aside. And if you lose, that money can be used to pay a fine. I'm sure there's problems with that, but it just doesn't seem right to me. But that's what I suspect is going to end up happening.
I just want to interject there. What you're talking about, and I know Erica may not agree since she used to work for the Justice Department, but we have seen so much apathy from government lawyers in terms of recognizing the additional steps they may need to take to ensure that there is a judgment left for the whistleblower to get an award. Because you're right, from a government lawyer's perspective, they have some different performance indicators than, say, a whistleblower needs. We've been fighting one case where the fraudster went to jail for 20 years. I think the wife who was part of the conspiracy lived in the house for 4 years, like without even paying taxes. We got all types of judgments. They've just forced the sale of the house. It's like a $3 million house. And yes, the whistleblower will be able to collect off of that, but it's like endless fighting and people not understanding that collecting an extra $1 million in a sanction could be really big for a whistleblower. Whereas other people might say, it's $1 million, they're focused on other things like whatever they're focused on. To be honest, I've never worked for the government, so I don't quite know what all those things are. But what I do know, I've seen it in a lot of cases. I had another case where believe it or not, the company that was defrauded got more money than the whistleblower, because the company went in for restitution and grabbed all the money, and it was like nothing left for the whistleblower. There's all these tricks and games get played that is just the way it is. And my recommendation is, just got to fight it out, and don't necessarily follow the leader.
So that kind of so in business we have this liquidation order of priority. Where do whistleblowers stand in that?
Well, in the one big bankruptcy case I participated in, we wanted all our money. We wanted every single penny. I put in for a massive amount. We negotiated, and the government gave us our 25% off of what they got, and we were all happy. But we collected a good sum out of the bankruptcy, but we intervened in it. We had to participate. We had to show up at the hearings. We had to make sure that we had a place at the table when they cut up what was left.
So did you get the money before stockholders got it, before debt holders got it, before employees' wages get there? I mean, where in the order do you get it?
Well, it's kind of complicated, but it was false claims. So for single damages, actual harm to the government, they were in the class A. They got that money. The treble damages never happened. So the judgment we got we had a $200 million judgment. The whistleblower got about $1.5 million because part of that judgment was down the road that would never be collected. But we fought super hard to make sure we were in the class A that would get first cut.
Interesting.
And it's a battle, because some people, there are a lot in the Justice Department. About half the people we work with are really good with whistleblowers. They understand it, they get it, they stand behind them. But there's others that are fairly apathetic.
So Tyler, would what the lawyers told you, are your lawyers' fees above everything else that you might get? Are they in there as far as getting paid?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, no, I don't think so. I knew what I was paying for when I paid for the lawyers, and I got what I wanted. The outcome that I got was exactly what I was hoping for. So I feel like it was money well spent. It was a lot of money. And so I'm just kind of, not thinking about it anymore. Just let it be in the past, move forward.
What I find really interesting is it's the opposite of what we think, that a whistleblower might be enticed by a possible payout. In this case, you're enticed to feel good, even if it costs you money, not actually getting money out of it.
Yeah, I guess so. And, I still hope that I am able to recover, I'm able to recover something. But, I'm setting expectations for myself.
Good idea.
I think one of the things, and maybe this is clear. And again, it's a testament to Tyler and every situation being different. But the kind of scenarios that Stephen and I were talking through, right, are when you follow a certain track, right, and for better or worse. And Tyler's options, might have been slightly different, but some of those tracks would have been open and some wouldn't have been in that particular fact scenario, right? So part of this is because it's, again, another reason to kind of pursue among a traditional track, if there is one, a False Claims Act track, a SEC whistleblower program, right, track, because there's a process. And once there's a process, there's regulations that say how money has to be distributed or statute that says how money has to be distributed to a whistleblower. Unfortunately, Tyler's not in that camp. So I just want to kind of, it's confusing to those outside of it, especially when you start talking about bankruptcy and lawyer fees, because it all gets kind of thrown in there together. In bankruptcy, it's even more confusing. So I think it's just that the scenario is very unique. In many ways, Tyler's scenario is very, very unique, but super important, right? And all of the other aspects of it, I think, really go to the heart of what we're talking about here, even if the mechanics are different than my average case.
So, and I just want to add on to all of this and say as follows, and Dave, kind of to your question from earlier, which is, where are we moving with this? We have some really good laws. We have a lot of really ethical people. We have some really good people who work in government that get it. Where are we going? The one thing that needs to be pushed is, and I'm going to just use Tyler as an example. If the story is $500,000 in lawyer fees, and maybe, and many people blacklisting or jobs, I don't know the particular, it's kind of like, I don't want to blow the whistle. I try as hard as I can to reinforce to the government agencies that sometimes don't do a good job making sure the whistleblowers get as much as they deserve. And to say, if someone like Tyler walks out with a big payday, that's sending the message, not just to other whistleblowers that maybe it's worth it, but also to the executives that they better be careful because there's true financial incentives. And I still see that. I was told by a DOJ attorney, it's my job to pay the whistleblower as little as possible because I represent the government and I need to make sure the government gets as much money as they should get. I was like, oh my God, don't you understand that's not the reason the law was even passed? But these are these cultural things, and I can only hope that we're moving in a good direction. I hope.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, is that's kind of where I titled this one, is that these are really the guardrails for capitalism, because if those who are ready to commit fraud are worried that people are going to do it because they might get a reward or they might get, then they're incentivized to go up and say something if they're caught. So I think that's a really interesting thing. So we should encourage some payouts that are big enough to say this is worthwhile for people doing. Yeah. So a couple more quick questions. Actually, maybe we'll get to one, but this is again from Stephen, from one of our participants here. When reporting the wrongdoing internally, he asks, the legal department often asks for an interview for the whistleblower to come in and talk to the legal department. The question is it appropriate to have an attorney with you when you go talk to the internal legal department?
I'm going to answer that question. I'll just say this. My advice, because this does come up, not with you, secretly in the back room telling you what to say. Don't, if you let the company know that you're somehow a rat fink and not on their team, you're going to get clobbered. You want to walk into that lawyer's office with a smile on your face, but you need your own lawyer giving you real advice on the other side. And I've had a case where that happens, where great lawyer wants to talk to you. Everything that happens will go straight to the government. We're undercover, we're informants, but you need your own lawyer. They can make that decision. But if the company thinks that you need a lawyer, they're going to all automatically have you in a bad place.
You're going to go into offensive mode. So you should do all those meetings by Zoom with your lawyer behind the screen. Okay, well, this time went way too fast because there's so many questions that come up, but it's a really fascinating topic. I just want to ask for a kind of a lightning round for 1 minute each. Can you each give us kind of your final thoughts? What do you want to leave people, and maybe especially business students, because that's what we are, and business practitioners, what should they take away from this conversation? Let's go round robin here.
I'll just start. So if you don't follow the dictum, if you see something, say something. If you see something, learn your rights.
I like that. I think mine would be, when you're in one of these situations, you're probably not going to have every piece of information. Kind of like, maybe you're aware of 12 bank accounts, but you're not aware of the other $350 billion or whatever it is. Like, you may only have one small subset of information, and the company's probably going to gaslight you into thinking you're crazy. But if something feels wrong, it probably is, and you should really trust your gut and listen to it and start talking to a lawyer and validate kind of what you've seen.
Well, that's a tough one to follow, because I think you're right. I'll build off of it, because I'll add one tip and then I'll give my last minute. Building off of that, especially in certain types of cases, the government knows that. The government rarely, the lawyer's job is to package what you have and to fit it in a larger context of what we know about other fraud schemes and what we know about the law and what's legal and what's not. And then we hand that over to the government, and then the government has this thing called subpoena power and other opportunities to go to fill in the rest of the picture, or somebody else may have come forward a month earlier, right? And so you won't know that. So the gaslighting piece is important, because it's lonely when you're making these decisions to reach out to an attorney. So I guess building off of that, and also thinking about my law students who may be listening too, but for business students as well, is I guess I just want folks to leave with an understanding kind of the power and responsibility that you have when you're in a leadership position, whether it's your GC of a company in a healthcare world, right? Or you are in a private equity firm, or you're who knows where, right? Wherever you end up, it is hard, but it is your responsibility, and you can make a difference there, and I think that there's resources and incentives, if that's whichever piece of today resonated with you, there are ways to find a path forward, and to there is the one whistleblower who, on a podcast called Fraud in America, she blew the whistle on Insys, which is one of the opioid manufacturers, very early on. And she talks about, she ended up recovering very little, if any, because of bankruptcy, all those issues. But she sleeps at night. She feels good about it. She had a lawyer to walk her through and experience and protect her in that respect. And she said she would do it again. And she talked about even how her kids are very proud of her for that. And, when you see that epidemic and you see the impact, she's one company, one sales rep at one company. And, she didn't stop the epidemic, but she sure helped bring some accountability and put some brakes on it. And that's huge. It's huge.
Well, that's a good way to, well, let me ask the final yes or no to Tyler. Knowing now what if you knew then what you now know about getting into it when you first blew the whistle, would you have done it? Would you do it again?
Yeah, I would absolutely do it again. At this point in my life, I can say absolutely. If you asked me that question in 2016, 2015, my answer was absolutely not, no way. You can never get me to do this ever again. But, time heals all wounds, and I'm starting to see more and more the positive impact that it's had, and the positive impact that my story has on, students like this moving forward. So yeah, I'd say that I absolutely do it again. I would do it completely differently, but I would do it again. Yeah. Well,
I think from the bottom of our hearts, we really thank you for standing up and being brave and living through that difficult time. Yeah. So I just want to thank all of you, Stephen, Erica, Tyler, for a fantastic, very fast discussion. My thing, an hour went by too quickly. Steve's book, Rules for Whistleblowers, a handbook for doing what's right, is available at kkc.com. And the thing is in the chat for a discount. And a thank you to our audience members who have attended the Cicillo Institute and Questrom webinars and special programs over this academic year. This is our concluding one for the year. I hope that they've been informative and enjoyable. Please watch for announcements for upcoming events at insights.bu.edu and enjoy our Insights podcast that dissects current business topics. So thank you very much to everybody. Thanks again to Steve.
Thank you very much.
Tyler. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.